Financial Post says 8 out of 10 homes in Toronto sold for less than ask last month. But everyone's calling that rough. But actually, it's even worse than that. The real question is how much below ask. And that really depends on the specific home, not the city average. Take this house, for example, in a top school district area, totally move-in ready, exact house that's supposed to hold its value and hold its price, but it didn't just sell for under list. It sold for $345,000 or about 16% under what the sellers actually wanted. Here's why. Hi, my name is Zen, and if you enjoy my data-driven and number-crunching real estate updates, be sure to like and subscribe. So this is a house in a very popular area in Banbury, around the Leslie York Mills area. So like a little bit more affluent, and it still didn't hold its value. They actually sold for almost the same price as what they bought it for in 2020. And there's really nothing wrong with the house. It's like your standard 1980s two-story home. The only thing I could probably say is that over here on this street at Denlow is kind of like an artery road. But one of the perks of being on this is that you are literally like a couple steps walk into one of the most prestigious kind of like public schools in the area that everyone's trying to get into. Like it's really well ranked. And it's like that perfect amount of you're just far enough where it's totally walkable, but not right across from it. You're hearing like the recess bells. And there was nothing wrong with the house. It was in perfectly move-in ready condition. You didn't have to renovate anything. And it sold for $345,000 below ask, and it took 121 days. If you actually look at the history of the listing, you can see that they bought it for 1.89 and they sold for $10,000 more. So after transaction costs, they lost money holding this property for 6 years. And this is in a part of Midtown that's supposed to hold its value. And this is why the article is saying that 8 out of 10 properties in Toronto are selling below ask, but it actually is way worse in July. Because one of the things you have to understand is this. A lot of these stats that these headlines are pulling from are using the Market Watch from Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, which I personally use myself. But there's a reason why I don't talk about days on market or sold over ask too much, because that can be easily manipulated. So you can see over here, they're saying that 80% of properties are selling for below ask and about 18.7% are selling above ask. And when you really think about it like critically from like first principles, anybody can arbitrarily sell any property over ask. If I give you a $1 million property to sell and you list it for $1 million and you sell it for $900,000, you sold it for like a bajillion% over ask. But did you sell it for what it was actually worth? And this is where you're seeing a lot of weird tactics that ultimately manipulate the sold to list percentage. And this is why I don't like using it too much. It's like a good barometer of which trend and which direction it's going. Because if you look at what this article is saying over here in February 2021, over 80% of homes are selling above ask. And the reason why the actual number isn't important, but the trend is important, is that it's significantly harder to sell above ask if there isn't as much demand, which I am seeing right now, where you still have a lot of sellers trying to list below ask, but then ultimately, they get 1 or 2 offers or way less than what, they were expecting, and then they relist at a higher price. And that's why when we break this down, we're saying, properties are selling about 97% over here for July 2026, and you're 103% in July 2021, when it was an absolute frenzy. That's just a direction, meaning a lot of properties were getting multiple bids, and they were positioning it that way. But right now, they're getting below 100 for sure. But when you look at this number says 97%. You're like, well, then you just showed me a property that sold for 16% below ask, which was 84% of list price. So what gives? And what gives is because the percentage sold is to the latest list price, meaning it sold for $1.9 million, which was up here, but their list price was $2,088,000. So it's not the 16% drop that you would have had if you initially looked at their starting price. It's actually of the last list price. So again, this is not a very good barometer of like what the market is doing right now. And you can see in this article where I've highlighted, they have some more statistics. And again, the number isn't so important, but it's the trend in which they're seeing right now that dictates the velocity, like the speed of a property being sold. So they're saying right now, condos are about 83% of them are below ask, which makes total sense. There's a lot more condos, so there's a lot more inventory. People have a lot more choices, so they're not likely to buy something else. It's an absolute slam dunk of a deal. And you can see that about 78% of detached homes are sold below ask, and 72.6% of semis and rows are below ask as well. And obviously, when you get into the higher price point, it's even lower because a lot of the expensive homes over $2 million, they sit there and they're just looking at offers, and they will most likely be significantly below ask in like multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's just the way it trades. And of course, with all articles, they use one of the most exaggerated examples where they have a home in Rosedale that was originally listed for $7.8 million and eventually sold for 5.4. And I'll share a little bit later on what that property is in this video. But what I want to draw your attention to are the few stats that can actually be gamed. And that's why when you read some of these articles, as much as it's painting like a doom and gloom, it actually sometimes is worse and sometimes it actually isn't. So the good example I'll show you right now is that the article is using that 97% right here of percentage sold relative to list. But like I was telling you earlier, it's 97% of the last list price. So it doesn't actually track the entire list price. And I really wish that our board would do that, because in a slow market, a lot of people just bump their listing and they just terminate it. And I've actually seen some realtors relist their property just as it sells to keep their percentage over ask. So if they sold that property that they listed for $1 million for $900,000, they would actually terminate just as it goes firm and list it for 900. So it looks like they sold for 100% of ask, just so that they can put the sold over ask on the front lawn. And it's just despicable behavior in my mind, but it happens nonetheless in our industry. So when we look at these metrics, right, just take that with a grain of salt. It is everything. Some people play by the rules and some people don't. And the other metric that I will also point out is we have now in the last year or so broken up the days on market. And I actually very little talk about this on my Market Watch because, again, it's not the number that matters, it's the trend. And you can see that the average LDOM, which stands for listing days on market, it means that particular listing. So in the example, the listing days on market would be starting from July 7th over here until this actually sold. It doesn't actually count the total days on market, which is PDOM, which I'll show a little bit later, which is how I get to 121 days on market, because from April to July is about 121 days. But this actual listing from July to when it actually sold in July is actually less than 30 days. So that's why when you look at the average PDOM, the property days on market, it's actually 45, and it's significantly higher because a lot of people are actually relisting it. And again, another kind of despicable move that I see in our industry is some people will actually gamify the listing some more by changing the abbreviation of the street. So let's say it's 123 Fake Street. The listing agent could basically call it 123 Fake Boulevard, and then it will have a complete restart on the property days on market. So it's things like this that kind of irk me, and why I know when I look at these data points. So that's why I know it's not a good data point, but I know it's a good direction in which it's heading, because most people play by the rules, but a lot of people don't actually, and that's what skews a lot of the information. And understanding all of this is important because below asking means something different depending on what you're buying. So if you want help figuring out what that specific search fits and what kind of discounts you can actually get in an area realistically for the property type and the price point that you're looking at, book a call with me using the link that's on the screen. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Now I want to show you some other examples of properties that were got at good discounts, but the good discount isn't necessarily a good barometer of whether the property was bought at a right price. And I said this many times before, even like pre-construction. Like if you're getting 40% off of what the list price is, but the market value is 50% off the list price, you technically still paid 10% over the market value, right? So this is where you need someone to show you what market value is by looking at what previous properties sold for in that kind of area. And you generally in this market want like lower than what the last guy sold for. And this is exactly what happened in this property in Banbury, where I haven't seen a two-story, like 2,500 square foot home sell for less than $2 million until this one. So they set the new bar lower. Now, here's another example for condos. These guys didn't actually relist, and the days on market is 122 days on market. So they sold for $127,500, less than what they originally wanted in 2025 at the end of the year at $650, and they landed at $522,000. And this is in one of the better buildings in Liberty Village. So you're looking at 500 square feet. It has parking and it has a den. So you're basically getting 1+1 with parking in Liberty Village across from the bridge to get into King West. So you're not like congested to get in and out of Strawn and East Liberty for $520,000. It actually is a really good deal. And sometimes what happens with this really is a timeline difference. And what I mean by timeline difference is sometimes the sellers really need to sit on the market. They see the showings, they see the inactivity before they actually budge. Some sellers are a little bit more stubborn than others, and some people are not. And some sellers are more motivated for other financial reasons. Maybe they're feeling some pressure, mortgages, tenants, whatever the reason it may be. Some sellers are just way more motivated, and they're going to be the ones that actually sell, and they set the bar lower and lower, especially in the condo market. And that's exactly what buyers should be looking at. They should be looking at properties that have sat on the market for a long time, because those sellers are way more motivated than if a seller just listed their property 2 days on market and they get one offer. Of course, they're going to be like, well, I'm just going to ignore you because I want this price. So that's why you have to understand the psychology of kind of sellers right now if you're trying to get a good deal. And here's the example that the article was talking about in Rosedale. So you can see they were in 2025 looking for $7.8 million. You can see just keeps subsequently going down, 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 down. You see they terminated, expired. Maybe they swapped some brokerages out here and there, but they're basically almost down $3 million, and they took a little more than 1 year to sell. And this is what we call price discovery. At some point, if you really have to sell over some time, because even though like technically it's saying that based on months of inventory, it is a balanced market, every day when we're trading, it totally feels like a buyer's market, and like 95% of the entire market. So this is what price discovery means. It means that the sellers have to discover at what price will the few buyers that are in the market right now will actually buy their property. And that's why how much external pressure on the seller to sell the home matters to what they're willing to sell it for. And this is where, you can read between the lines and the listings and get intel from the other agent to kind of paint a picture of just how motivated that seller actually is. And one of my final points that I'll point out here is similar to the Financial Post article. This one is now, instead of talking about how many homes are selling for less than list price, this is just talking about how long a home is sitting on the market for. So you remember how I was saying there's listing days on market and there's property days on market. So this data point that they're using for July over here, talking about how many days on market it took a property to sell in this particular area, it is meaningless, because if the property was listed for 120 days prior, and then they relisted for $100,000 less than what they asked previously, and then they finally found a buyer, which happens like all the time, then your days on market is like 3 or 5. Because the way I look at it is most homes are still selling with conditions right now. Traditionally, you're 5 days and you count the weekend, that's 7 days, which basically means that said listing to sell in 10 days on market on average as a whole would have had to basically sell and had an offer in like day 1 to 3. I don't think that's happening right now. So that's why these particular average days on market are very skewed. And I can tell you from the areas that I know, like Dover Court, okay, certain pockets kind of moving. I can tell you in Bullock Markham, it's probably the least desirable pockets of Markham. So like 17 days on market, I wouldn't say it's a hot market by any chance. And then I can tell you Victoria Park Village in North York, which is basically Scarborough at that point, is not a very sought after area. So I could see people dropping their price, relisting it, and then ultimately selling, even though they are, call it 17 days on market, they probably likely was significantly longer in a previous listing. I will say Scene Village over here at 17 days kind of makes sense, because it's in Toronto, like I was saying before. It's kind of like moving if you're at an entry-level kind of product. And then when we look at like the homes that take the longest to sell in July, upwards of 77 days, you're in Chaplain Estates, it's Forest Hill. Luxury product generally takes significantly longer to sell. It's not like someone's throwing like a few $1 million at you right away. So that's what I'm saying. When you look at this metric, or you look at like the areas, that's just people splicing up the data the way it is being told. But without understanding the context and nuance behind it, it really is just bad data. It really is. Maybe good for the trend it's going, but as a whole to base a purchase off of, absolutely terrible. And now that you understand that you can get a significant discount, even though sellers are not listing their properties right now and they're cutting it off completely, where we're seeing the active listings fall and the new listings fall from like the latest market watch, prices are still falling for the reasons that there aren't that many buyers. And this is exactly what I talk about in this video that's on your screen. So make sure to check that out. I'll see you in that one. Until next time, your move, your future. See ya.